Hey everybody, I know one of these is way overdue, but I've been way too focused on the NFL playoffs for that. Matthew Stafford, you magnificent Chad. I am so sorry that you wasted most of your career in the whole organization that I'm somehow still a fan of. You realize this could have been us, right? You had this man behind center for over a decade, and he had Megatron to throw to for most of that time, and you couldn't even win one playoff game? Pathetic! I have been watching quite a bit lately, so to make up for lost time, I'm just gonna go over what I think are the more noteworthy things that I watched. So, without further ado, let's swing into things with... Yeah, I watched this little underground indie project called Spider-Man No Way Jose. At one point I was considering doing a ranking video of all the Spider-Man movies before this came out, but I don't feel like I need to go into too much detail about those, so I'm just gonna flash my rankings on the screen right now. Boom, 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 boom. It's important to note that with a big franchise, I really like when they do something a little subversive, so I ended up really liking where they took the story after the ending of Far From Home. And then in a twist that no one saw coming, I'm sure, they actually brought back the live-action Spider-Man villains and the previous two Spider-Man incarnations. Andrew Garfield was actually one of the better parts of the movie, surprisingly. I feel like it's safe to say that one of the secondary goals of this movie was to redeem him as Peter Parker, and isn't it crazy that with a competent script, the good ideas on paper that were present in those movies can be fleshed out and make the character likable and relatable? What a concept. I really don't have a problem with this movie's pretty intense fan service because it was in favor of progressing characters and furthering the story, so I have no issues with that. The only issues I do have are in some of the plot conveniences and how they treated certain characters. For example, the only reason the whole conflict of the movie happens is because Doctor Strange just decided not to tell Peter what the spell was gonna do until he was actually already doing it. Like, really? You couldn't have found a better way to just have that happen? I also wasn't a fan of how they were really clearly playing favorites with the villain characters. Like, Willem Dafoe obviously steals the show in that front, and Doc Ock and Electro were serviceable, I guess, but then Sandman and the Lizard have nothing to do, pretty much. The Lizard in particular, you could completely excise from the story and it would not change at all. So yeah, despite a few little grievances, I still very much enjoyed this experience, and I think it's safe to say if you've ever enjoyed a Spider-Man movie in the past, you're gonna get something out of this one. Pretty sure that everyone who wanted to see this movie already has, but on the off chance that you haven't, you should. 7 out of 10. The Power of the Dog. This is a really interesting one for me to try to dissect personally. From a technical perspective, it's phenomenal. It's ridiculously well shot, and the score by Johnny Greenwood is just mwah. The acting was all great too, but there was a decision made to more or less rely on the performances to do the heavy lifting in terms of character development rather than the actual script, which is an interesting idea, but where that didn't work for me was this weird predicament that I have with Benedict Cumberbatch in particular. I think he's undeniably a great actor, but whenever I see him in something, it doesn't matter how good he is, I can't see a character come through. I just see the actor Benedict Cumberbatch saying words. I couldn't tell you what's behind that weird phenomenon, but given that little perfect storm of circumstances, it hindered my enjoyment of this movie a little bit, even though I really liked what they were going for. I might have to get back to you on this one, but for now I'm gonna give it a 6 out of 10. In my notes, I wrote the title as Wet Sides Troy. That's this movie's name from now on, Wet Sides Troy. It's been a long time since I saw the original in high school English, but from what I can remember, I think this is a pretty clear improvement over the original. This should come with the caveat that musicals are pretty much my least favorite genre of film, and when I do like one, it's usually in spite of the fact that it's a musical, not because it is. But this movie adds to that by being really well shot. The shot of the puddle in particular is just mind-blowing. Was this necessary? I couldn't really tell you. I mean, you can't change up too much about this narrative because it just follows the Romeo and Juliet structure, and we all know how that turned out. I don't really know what else to say. It looks really good, the acting was really good for the most part, and I think the story was fine. 7 out of 10. Speaking of musicals, Encanto is my favorite Disney movie since Moana, and both of those have music by Lin-Manuel Miranda. I should really watch Tick Tick Boom, shouldn't I? Aside from the music being really catchy, I really appreciated the fact that this is the only kids movie that I can really recall that doesn't have a true antagonist. It's refreshing to see a kids movie where the conflict isn't unbearably forced and the perspective of all the characters is understandable at the very least. That being said, I would have liked a little more backstory, like why did this family just suddenly get a magic house that gives all the kids magic abilities? Just because. I can't make my mind up as to whether that makes me like it more or less. But yeah, I thought this was pretty great and I'd strongly recommend it. 8 out of 10. The Lost Daughter. Interestingly enough, this was the directorial debut of Maggie Gyllenhaal, and I'm pretty impressed. First of all, Olivia Colman can do no wrong in my book, but pairing up Jessie Buckley to play the younger version of her character, that was just perfect casting. I also really like the double meaning of the title, and I think they explored the concept of parental regret really well, but after a certain point it just kind of feels like they're going over the same point over and over in a bunch of different ways. I just kept thinking, yeah, okay, you pretty much already said that. Can we get to the payoff now? I am looking forward to seeing what she does next, because I think this was a pretty impressive debut behind the camera. I'm gonna give it a 7 out of 10. The Voyeurs. I felt like talking about this one because I have to say I think it gives Showgirls a run for its money as the horniest movie ever made. My Letterboxd review for this simply says, people who watch porn for the plot will love this. I say that because at times it did have porno quality acting, particularly from Justice Smith, who incorporates about 6 different accents into his character, none of which sound convincing. When he first showed up, the way he talked was so weird and off-putting and made me really uncomfortable every time he opened his mouth.
What's going on with our friendly next-door neighbors?
I swear there's a point where he says, "Hi, babe," and it's on par with the first line from The Room.
Hi, babe.
I also made the Showgirls comparison because it tries everything in its power to just insist that it's about more than its sexually charged plot. But when you break it down, pretty much every scene has some sort of like wink wink, nudge nudge, this person's really hot, aren't they? Kind of undertone. And by the way, the main character is one of the most unlikable protagonists I've seen in recent memory. Like, yeah, I don't believe the message you're going for here at the end. This whole thing could have been avoided if she just minded her own f***ing business.
It is absolutely 150% your fault!
I'm gonna give this a 3 out of 10 for the occasional so bad it's good moment. Titane. This movie is really, really weird. This is a French film from director Julia Ducrado, whose last movie was Raw, which I really enjoyed. It was graphic and disturbing, kind of, but there was clearly an intent behind that. This movie won the Palme d'Or at Cannes Film Festival, which, for those of you who might not know, that's basically the equivalent of Best Picture from the most prestigious film festival in the world. So naturally I was intrigued to see what this was all about. I didn't know anything about it going in, and I think that was for the better. The really weird stuff is mostly front-logged, and then it kind of transitions into being a more subtle, soulful art film. I have some questions about the implications of some of the really weird stuff, but I liked it. It was surprisingly kinda wholesome for a movie about a serial killer who gets impregnated by a car. No, I will not elaborate further on that. I'm gonna give this a 7 out of 10. Hoop Dreams. I got this on Criterion Blu-ray, and this was originally supposed to just be a 30-minute short for PBS, but the story that they ended up locking onto ended up being too good, and it ended up nearly 3 hours long. The basics of it are that the film follows two basketball prospects from inner city Chicago as they go through their high school years as a kind of A and B story. I won't spoil anything, but the dichotomy that they end up exploring between these two kids is really fascinating. In a way, I could kind of see this same general story being portrayed in your run-of-the-mill inspirational sports stories, but the emphasis would be a little bit different, and this movie works much better for that. It also explores in two very different ways the expectations that come with being a high-profile athlete and the things that that can do to a kid's psyche if everything doesn't go exactly as planned. The only real problem I had with it were some minor pacing issues, but I really liked this overall, and I'm gonna give it a 8 out of 10. I'm gonna stick with that for now, but it might change on a second watch. Taste of Cherry. This is an Iranian film, and it will not leave my brain. This is just an amazing film. This is a fantastic example of taking advantage of setting. It basically follows the main character driving the same route with different people, and I'm not gonna say anything more specific than that. It's beautifully shot, it's philosophical, it's very character focused, and it proposes some challenging questions, all things that I really love to see. I might go as far as to say that this is my favorite movie from 1997, the year I was born, which is some pretty high praise considering my default answer before was Good Will Hunting. I adore this movie, and if you want to track it down, I highly suggest doing so because this is one of the best examples I've seen of why language is not a barrier to a good story, and I'm gonna give it a 10 out of 10. Now before you go, do not, I repeat, do not subscribe to this channel or I swear to God you will never see the end of me. Because I'll keep making videos like this and you'll be able to see them when they get posted.